An unspoken question we have in the conversation is, of course, why should I listen to this guy? Why should I listen to this guy? So I could list out credentials, but I'd rather just let you decide for yourself based on what I present. And since I value your time, if I should fail to satisfy all your questions, I'd be charmed to talk with you this afternoon at lunch or at dinner this evening. And with that, let me state briefly what I hope to convey to you today. Sorry. This keeps moving here. The mouse is moving. There we go. Thank you. So my thesis is this: in the rapidly changing educational environment we now face, the transfer of knowledge and wisdom as opposed to mere information to future generation will require approaches that by necessity do not conflate wisdom and knowledge with mere information. One of perhaps several approaches which I ask you to consider is one that our educational nonprofit, the Fellowship of Arts and Mysteries, has termed the root and branch philosophy of education. After my first time through college and several years of drafting educational materials based on complex legislation aimed at constituents with an assumed educational level of 8th grade, I stumbled into a different vocation, unexpectedly, and for a variety of economic reasons. What began as a hobby interest in making shoes by hand turned into an occupational pathway via 2 apprenticeships totaling 7 years, and this was my second master, Al Segudo. During the second of these, I had the honor of learning at the elbow of D.A. Al Segudo, who was the master of the shoemaking program for the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. Al's rigorously scholastic program was not meant to produce mere mechanics, as he said, which was an archaic denigration for craftsmen who understood little beyond the simple performance of their skill. As he put it during the annual matriculation ceremony to recognize newly minted journeymen, he strove to produce what he termed scholar artisans. Unbeknownst to him or to me, this would set the future pattern for what we call root and branch philosophy. During and after these years, our family was involved in the rediscovery movement of classical Christian education, arguably sparked into new life by Dorothy Sayers' 1947 Oxford speech entitled "The Lost Tools of Learning." This was then combined with extensive research undertaken on the topic of historic trade guilds and apprenticeships. And thus I stumbled upon a realization that was penned nearly 3,000 years ago by the God-inspired wisdom of King Solomon. That is to say, there's really nothing new under the sun. For you see, it seems that those of us in the classical Christian education movement who have been confidently asserting classical education's powerful influence on the formation of Western civilization have been, well, largely correct. From Aristotle to Augustine to Aquinas, Benedict to Boniface to Bacon, Charlemagne to Chaucer to Chesterton, and so forth. The considerable strengths of classical education have formed much of our cultural milieu for over 2 millennia. Sayers' further observation that the grammar, dialectic, or logic and rhetoric emphases of the trivium were admirably adapted to stages of childhood and early adult development was, of course, a significant contribution to the modern resurgence. Subsequent realizations that its underlying assumption of God rather than God as an add-on to education, and the eminence that classical education ascribes to truth, goodness, and beauty, have made this, for many parents and educators, an attractive alternative to the Prussian system adopted nearly 200 years ago. Accordingly, the number of classical schools in the US has doubled in the past decade, and it's likely to grow exponentially in the next 10 years. This particular stream of orality and literacy indeed has been and is once again becoming a stream of no mean significance. Its resurgence is not unlike the Allegheny River experiencing heavy rains after a long drought. Thus, it is correct to regard its influence in the past as tremendous and likely so in the future. However, nobody could contend that the Allegheny makes the mighty Ohio alone without the Monongahela. So we may consider what this other river may be, which has so shaped our civilization, and which may yet pass wisdom and knowledge on to future generations. I submit humbly that this Monongahela are the trade guilds and apprenticeships. There are few institutions of Western civilization, and before that of ancient Jewish, Greek, and Roman cultures, which are so dimly understood as the trade guilds. Despite hundreds of hogsheads of academic ink being spilled on this subject, there are too many misconceptions which yet persist. Amongst these are the rabidly anti-guild view, which is basically that they were mere bastions of hierarchical privilege and patronage, as well as monopolistic protectionism. Likewise, the opposing pro-guild view sees them as the vanguards of craftsmanship and paragons of consumer protection against unscrupulous practitioners. In both antitheses, elements of truth, exaggerations of truth, and unprovable claims exist. Another gross misconception is that guilds were merely early corollaries of the modern trade unions, even though there are stark differences in both motivations and outcomes between these two. And there are many more errors which are well beyond the scope of this talk. What is frequently missed in such discussions is the fact that beginning in the late 14th, early 15th century, trade guilds preserved, protected, and promoted the arts and mysteries, which is a charmingly antiquated phrase that essentially means skilled trades. And they did this through an incorporated fraternal pedagogy. Broadly speaking, trade guilds are more organism than institution. And their educational philosophy had at its center a kind of discipleship agreement in the form of the apprenticeship indenture. This legally binding contract was between the master or mistress of the trade shop and the apprentice. And like modern truancy laws, it did not require the apprentice's consent, but rather was executed on behalf of the youth by his or her parents, or if orphaned, by a guardian, which is very often the parish church. Nevertheless, it was not uncommon to have a prospective apprentice serve a short probation to determine mutual suitability prior to the contractual bond. Our early forebears were not the dullards we too often presume them to be. The indenture often provided for a rather comprehensive schooling for the apprentice, certainly in things pertaining to the trade, but also in many things besides, especially after the additional fuel of the printing press and the Reformation were applied. For example, reading the Bible perfectly, that's a quote, writing, ciphering, which is mathematics, accounting, animal husbandry, farming, gardening, land surveying, allied trades, for example, shoemakers being taught canning or currying, and many other aspects of what could resemble a liberal arts education were, quote, taught or caused to be taught. This generally happened between the ages of 11 and 22. In some cases, even musical education or dance lessons were stipulated. The master or mistress was further bound to provide food, clothing, lodgings, laundry services, and at the culmination of the apprenticeship, 1 to 2 new suits of clothing, and or a basic kit of tools. It was not even unheard of for a, quote, new beaver hat to be listed. Fulfillment of the apprentice's education took many forms. Apprentices were often taught to read by reading aloud in the shop while the master and the journeyman worked. Encountering a difficult word or concept, the apprentice could appeal to the collective for assistance. One apprentice worked in his father's shop for a set number of hours during the day and then studied maths, quote unquote, geometry, and surveying with a surveyor in the evening. Notwithstanding, and as in my own case, apprentices learned much more than the trade and mere subjects. The apprentice became essentially a member of the family in many respects. For better or for worse, their faith, their worldview, their manners, their personal habits, their taste, how to eat with a knife and fork like a civilized person, and their character were all shaped by this workshop discipleship within the larger context of the guild. Naturally, this was not done faultlessly, but if done well, it produced well-formed, well-rounded adults. Contrary to lowly craftsman stereotypes, a remarkable number of shoemakers, weavers, tailors, and others of what were called the gentle trades published poetry, for instance, in late medieval through early modern periods. Further, over a 2,000-year period, countless tradesmen became headmasters, missionaries, clerics, pastors, venerable martyrs, wealthy philanthropists, writers, councilmen, burgesses, lord mayors, bishops, popes, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Navy admirals, there we go, Meister singers, and even movie stars. Bet you didn't know Daniel Day-Lewis studied shoemaking from an Italian shoemaker. Kind of an interesting thing. One leather worker, a certain Saul of Tarsus, became the great apostle, serving the first century church and writing approximately 2/3 of the New Testament. I recently read a really interesting thing that we've always called him a tent maker, but I believe it may be Tertullian. Don't quote me on that. There's two citations where the Greek word was rendered shoemaker instead of tent maker, just for inference. Additionally, the Lord and Savior of all mankind was born into the family of nothing else than a tradesman. These examples speak nobly of artisans' potential, and it at least intimates that medieval universities did have a counterpart in creating well-educated and capable subjects and citizens. Now, in the master's interest, the apprentice was bound to learn the trade and all of its associated pedagogy, to live by a prescribed code of conduct, to obey his or her master's lawful orders, and not to contract marriage without the master's consent. I've never been able to get my apprentices to agree to that part. In this way, the indenture stood as guarantor that the master or mistress would not be defrauded of a rather heavy investment of time and energy made during the first 4 years of apprenticeship. But it also ensured that, and I can attest to this from my own experience, that the truly competent but rudimentary, let me repeat that, truly competent but rudimentary knowledge of the first 4 years would then receive time to take root in the soil of the apprentice's soul. It offered to the budding artisan 3 very fruitful years of practice, wisdom, maturation, and experience. All of this emphasizes the formation of a civically and humanly responsible person over mere detached dissemination of information or mechanical skill. It was supported and augmented by a fraternal framework within each Chattan's guild. And while no institution comprised of the fallen sons of Adam is without its fault or regrettable characteristics, it can at least be said that the peer pressure of the guilds did have many salutary effects as well. An anecdote may be in order here. In my own apprenticeship, I was developed in matters that were, at best, peripheral to the effective execution of making a shoe or boot. When Al Segudo, like a doting older brother, coached me for my first solo research trip in calciology, he taught me how to dress for a good first impression, how to introduce myself, how to stand tall, how to demonstrate due regard for the fragile artifacts I was being privileged to work with, and how to foster the professional relationships that resulted. As I've asked many others before this, did any of this make me better at sewing a sole on a shoe? Probably not. Naturally, it would be difficult to attribute any enhancement of technical ability to his mentoring. But did it make me a better shoemaker, that is to say, a better person in the practice of my trade, irrespective of technical skill or acumen? Now, there is the question. This brings me back to the root and branch philosophy of education as a means of oral and literary formation of human souls, while simultaneously providing occupational opportunities. For far too many, the aim of education is implicitly something along the lines of get good grades, to get a good job, to gain a lot of wealth, to live comfortably and retire, and then to die. In fairness, and thanks be to God, this does not accurately reflect many persons' real approach to life. But if we're honest, we know that it sometimes is the unspoken part, the default that we must mitigate against in our own thought world. The stated aims of classical education that I or other of its proponents might offer to anyone who will listen to us are repeated, to use a Latin phrase, ad nauseum. These are, of course, truth, goodness, and beauty. I wish to use my remaining few minutes to contend for the following, that grafting the classical liberal arts education into traditional handwork apprenticeships during the logic and rhetoric stages of learning, roughly middle school and secondary school, or ages 12 to 18, is an excellent pathway for those gifted by God to work with their hands, helping them to contribute to societal rebuilding and to the common weal. Recent statistics reveal there's a marked paradigm shift wherein young men and women are weighing the pursuit of trades and apprenticeships over conventional academic pathways. Department of Labor statistics show that 18 to 25-year-olds, particularly males, now constitute between a quarter and a third of new hires in the skilled trades, and this trend line seems to be going up. By contrast, according to Cengage Group's 2025 Graduate Employability Report, only 30% of 2025 college graduates are working in their field of study, down from 41% in 2024. Additionally, 33% of graduates are unemployed, 26% are employed in unrelated fields, and 46% do not feel they possess what they need to get into their field. Now, this is not an argument against college as a legitimate pathway. I'm constantly falling back on my own college education. And obviously, a college education is a much needed reality for many occupations. Nevertheless, these employment realities are realities. And combined with rising student loan debt, they offer at least some explanation of this shift in emphasis. When I was in high school, going to college was a foregone conclusion, and those who chose trades, rightly or wrongly, were viewed as being not able to make the cut, academically speaking. And now we see a growing preference for trades amongst many young people. But there's a question that haunts me, and it's this: what orality and literacy, what life of the soul, to speak, will they receive? What robust worldview, replete with due wonder of creatures toward our Creator, and thus a sense of being that Tolkien called being a sub-creator, will be offered to them? What sense of the true, the good, and the beautiful can be gained in a mere technical school, which focuses almost exclusively on just skills and information? The root and branch philosophy offers the practical craftsman a robust repository of empirical and pragmatical skills. Yes. As well as excellent cognitive development. For example, neuroscience studies done by the husband-wife team of Ruud van der Wiel and Audrey van der Meer at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology have increasingly shown enhanced cognitive development in students who handwrite notes versus those who use their laptops. I love watching these videos on this. For correspondence with these researchers, I've been corresponding with Dr. van der Meer. We believe that traditional handwork trades also offer great promise for enhanced cognition. And she said that basically she thinks the same idea would apply. I do all my shoemaking by hand. I don't use a machine. And she said she thinks that the same thing that's going on with the handwriting versus keyboarding your notes may be the same type of thing. She says it's a worthy hypothesis that might happen when you're hand sewing versus running something through a machine. Further, several studies have shown that learning true craftsmanship, and I mean not making popsicle stick birdhouses, between the ages of 10 and 20 greatly develops confidence, problem-solving skills, action-consequence association, increased attention span, and excellence across numerous metrics. And yet, while these are all worthwhile to consider, they are, in all probability, inferior to the more soul-forming ways that a young person might be impacted by the root and branch approach. For example, linking the classical idea of repetitio. I'm ahead of myself. I think I have slides and backwards. Okay, I'll just say it. Linking the classical idea of repetitio mater memoriae, repetition is memory's mother, with daily handwork tasks, allows the master to engage the apprentice with rehearsing spoken narrative and engaging organic oral discussion of literature and other preceptor-taught academic disciplines. And my slide would have said, for instance, discussing Milton while you're sewing a sole on a shoe. There's also exploiting daily life liturgies of work, which help form the order amoris, or the prioritization of what we love, properly alongside of academic learning, versus kind of what we call is called sometimes a Cardean approach from Cardia, as opposed to a Cartesian approach. Emphasizing communal storytelling and the essentiality of legend and lore, including what C.S. Lewis termed true myth, better fortifies the person and the sense of place, the life of the soul of the tradesmen in their future work and in their worship. We widen the definition of technology and appreciation of ancestral wisdom, while developing healthy application of more modern forms, and this develops balance and what we call digital temperance. And by learning the daily running of a shop, the apprentice gains a sense of task organization and business acumen. Further, and in like manner, students are already engaged in more conventional academic educations, i.e., say, a classical school, are likely to benefit greatly from having elements of applied artisan apprenticeships offered alongside their middle and upper level curriculae. By forming partnerships with like-minded artisans, academically focused schools may greatly enhance the developmental and formational qualities of their existing course offerings, while at the same time better preparing their graduates for a wider range of possible vocations. Root and branch education also offers a chance to embrace responsibility early and to form an excellent work ethic. Karen McDonald even argued in a 2017 article for the Foundation of Economic Education that, quote, teenagers are not innately troubled. She said, apprenticeships offer a valuable time-tested approach to connect adolescents with the authentic practical experiences of the adult world. Even for those who are not pursuing a trades career, the benefits of apprenticeships are garnering support. G.K. Chesterton wrote that, quote, every education teaches a philosophy, if not by dogma, then by suggestion, by implication, by atmosphere. Every part of that education has a connection with every other part. If it does not combine to convey some general view of life, it's not an education at all. We humbly submit that renewing root and branch education today reflects such an organic mindset for the skilled trades. And by this cultivation of a love for God and others, which involves the head, the hearts, the hands, and the whole person in future adults, we believe there is the hope of a fruitful harvest in due time if we do not grow weary. Thank you.